One director, one audition, and a single cruel dismissal. He thought he ended her career in an instant, but fate had prepared a stage where she would return, holding something he could never take back. The late afternoon sun draped Los Angeles in a golden haze, the kind of light that turned glass towers into firelit monuments and painted even the busiest streets with an almost cinematic glow. Traffic crawled along the boulevard, horns occasionally, breaking the steady hum of the city, but within the gated walls of a grand film studio, there was a quieter tension in the air, one heavy with ambition, dreams, and the silent weight of judgment. She stepped through the tall glass doors, clutching her script so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. A young black actress in her early 20s, she moved with both hesitance and determination, her every step echoing across the marble floor of the studio lobby. Her name, though still unknown to the world, carried in it years of late-night rehearsals, unpaid performances, and whispered prayers for just one chance to be seen. Her heart beat fast, each thud matching the rhythm of her footsteps. But her eyes held something stronger than fear. They carried a quiet fire, a refusal to bow to the doubts that had followed her for as long as she could remember. The building itself seemed designed to intimidate. The ceilings arched high above like a cathedral devoted to cinema, framed with portraits of past legends who had once stood in the same place, chasing the same dream. Their sepia-toned faces stared down at her, actors frozen in time, as if reminding her that greatness required both sacrifice and survival. She inhaled slowly, trying to gather courage, and approached the elevator that would take her up to the casting floor. The mirrored doors slid shut, catching her reflection, wide eyes, slightly trembling lips, and the script pressed tightly to her chest as though it were a shield. When the elevator opened, she was greeted not by warmth but by silence. The waiting area outside the casting room was stark and pristine, lined with sleek leather chairs and a single water cooler humming softly in the corner. Other actors had already left. She was the last audition of the day. The stillness made the moment feel heavier, as if the air itself were watching her. She adjusted the hem of her dress and whispered the first few lines under her breath, her lips moving quickly, praying that her voice wouldn't fail her once she stepped inside. The door to the audition room creaked open. A tall man in his late 50s stood behind a long wooden table, his presence commanding without effort. He was the kind of figure everyone in Hollywood knew by name, the renowned director who had turned countless films into masterpieces. His reputation stretched far beyond his artistry. He was known for being unyielding, brutally honest, and unapologetically selective. Too many. He was the gatekeeper of greatness to her. In this moment, he was both opportunity and obstacle. He didn't rise to greet her. Instead, he glanced up, briefly, his piercing blue eyes cold and detached, then returned to jotting something in his leather-bound notebook. The fluorescent light above cast sharp shadows on his face, exaggerating the stern lines etched into his features. His hair, silver and carefully combed back, gleamed under the light, but there was nothing warm about his appearance. Everything about him, his tailored suit, his clipped movements, his silence, spoke of authority and control. "Name," he said flatly, not even bothering to look at her this time. She swallowed, her throat dry. "Amara Jameson," she replied, her voice steady though her fingers betrayed her with a faint tremble as she held out her script. The director finally raised his gaze, scanning her with a quickness that felt more like dismissal than consideration. His eyes lingered for a moment, not on her talent, not on her preparation, but on her appearance. It was a look she had grown accustomed to, measuring, skeptical, as though deciding whether her very presence fit into the narrow worlds he crafted. On screen, he tapped his pen twice against the notebook, a sound sharp enough to pierce the silence of the room. The walls of the casting studio were bare, painted in an off-white that reflected the harsh lights, making the space feel clinical. A single camera on a tripod stood pointed at the small mark on the floor where she was meant to stand, its red light blinking like an unblinking eye. She walked to the mark, her heels clicking softly against the floor, and took her place. Every detail felt magnified, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the smell of stale coffee from a forgotten cup on the director's desk, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her shoulders. Amara gripped her script with both hands, then forced herself to loosen her fingers. She inhaled again, deeper this time, letting the words she had practiced countless times rise within her. She needed him to see more than what was on the surface. She wanted him to hear the emotion in her voice, to feel the truth in her delivery. To understand that she wasn't just another hopeful face in a long line of auditions. She was ready to give everything in this moment, no matter how cold his gaze remained. But the director leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. To him, this was just another late afternoon, another aspiring actor passing through the room, another chance to decide who belonged and who did not. His silence filled the space between them, heavy and suffocating, as though daring her to prove that she deserved to stand there at all. And so, with her heart racing and her voice ready to break the stillness, Amara lifted her chin and prepared to begin. The script trembled faintly in Amara's hands, but her voice did not. When she began, the room shifted. Her words spilled into the sterile casting space with a force that felt almost out of place. Like rain falling inside a glass chamber, she gave herself over completely to the character, her breath catching in just the right places, her voice breaking with sorrow, then rising again with defiance. The fluorescent lights above seemed to fade as her performance filled the silence, pulling the air taut with emotion. She wasn't simply reciting lines. She was living them. Each gesture, each pause, carried the weight of years she had endured, the longing, the rejection, the quiet prayers whispered into her pillow. The story she spoke wasn't only the script's, it was hers. For a brief, fragile moment, it seemed as if the director might finally see her, but halfway through, the sound of his pen snapping against the table shattered everything. That's enough. His voice cut across her words like a blade. Amara froze. Her lips still parted in the middle of a line. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her body electric with the emotion she had summoned. But the moment was ripped away. She lowered the script, slowly, her eyes flickering to him, searching for something, understanding, acknowledgement, even the faintest sign that he had felt what she had just given. The director didn't look up. He was already writing in his notebook. "You don't have the right look," he said flatly, his tone final, as if pronouncing a verdict. The words struck harder than any physical blow. Not talent, not delivery, not even a critique of her technique, just look. The shallow dismissal echoed inside her like a hollow drum. She had heard those words before, wrapped in different forms, but each time they carried the same poison core, a refusal to see her as more than the color of her skin, more than the surface of her face. She forced herself to stand tall, though her heart stung. Her voice caught, but she steadied it. "Thank you for your time." The director finally lifted his eyes, but only to wave her off with the faintest flick of his hand. "We're looking for something different. You can go. Different." The word lingered like smoke. Her jaw tightened, but her expression remained calm. Dignity was all she had left in that room, and she refused to let him strip it away. She lowered her eyes briefly to hide the storm within her, then carefully tucked the script against her chest, holding it not as a shield anymore, but as a promise. To herself, she turned to leave, and as she moved toward the door, the silence stretched. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet she would not let him see the crack in her armor. Her shoulders stayed squared, her head lifted, even as pain coiled in her chest. It was then, as her hand reached for the door handle, that she noticed movement in the far corner of the room. A young assistant, hardly older than she was, stood near the camera, clutching a clipboard. Unlike the director, his eyes had not been indifferent. They shone with something she had longed for, a glimmer of recognition, of quiet awe. His lips were pressed tightly together, as though holding back words he dared not speak in front of his superior. Their gazes met for only a second, but in that fleeting moment, she felt seen. Her heart clenched at the irony. The man whose approval she saw so desperately hadn't even truly looked at her, but a silent observer had. Someone who had no power, no influence, no authority, yet his expression carried more honesty than all of the director's words combined. Amara gave him the faintest smile, small and tired, but full of gratitude, before she stepped out of the room. The hallway outside was bright, sunlight streaming in through tall windows, almost blinding after the harsh glow of the audition space. She paused there, pressing her back against the cool wall, exhaling the breath she had held since he cut her off. For a moment, her body trembled, not from nerves now, but from the raw injustice of it inside. Her mind replayed every second, the way her voice had soared, the truth she had poured into her lines, and then how quickly it was discarded with a single sentence. "You don't have the right look." Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails pressing into her palms. She wanted to scream, to demand he see her for more than the surface. But what good would it do? His world was built on doors like these doors that opened for some, slammed shut for others. So instead, she stood in silence until her breathing slowed. When she finally pushed herself away from the wall, her steps were steady. She walked down the corridor, past the sepia portraits of legends that seemed to mock her pain. Yet even as her heart ached, another feeling began to stir beneath the grief, something harder, sharper, not anger, but resolve. The director might not have seen her, but she had seen herself, and someone else had to. Hidden in the corner with a clipboard and a quiet pair of eyes that held more belief than the man in a tailored suit ever could. As she exited the studio into the fading afternoon light, Amara held onto that look, that fleeting spark of recognition. She didn't yet know what it meant or where it would lead, but she clung to it like a seed waiting to grow, because deep down, she knew her story wasn't finished here, not even close. The world outside the studio felt almost cruelly bright, the late afternoon sun draping Los Angeles in a warm glow that mocked the heaviness inside her chest. Amara walked down the sidewalk with measured steps, her script still pressed against her side. Each step carried the echo of the director's words, but she refused to let them define her. They would sting, yes, but they would not shatter her. Days became weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Rejection was no stranger to her. It arrived in crisp emails that began with "unfortunately" and ended with hollow wishes for her future endeavors. It arrived in casting rooms where smiles were polite, voices practiced, and eyes slid past her as though she were invisible. It arrived in excuses about marketability, in comments disguised as compliments, but dripping with condescension. "You're very talented, but we just don't think audiences are ready." Still, Amara did not stop. If Hollywood would not open its doors, she would find other stages. On Friday nights, when the city was alive with neon and music, she stood beneath the dim lights of small community theaters tucked away in forgotten corners of Los Angeles. The rooms were tiny, sometimes no more than 50 folding chairs, and a curtain that barely reached the floor. But when she stepped into character, the space transformed. The scent of dust and old wood vanished. The cracked floorboards disappeared. All that remained was her voice, trembling and powerful, filling every inch of the room. The audiences were small, but they listened, they clapped, they felt, and in their applause, she found something the grand studios had denied her: validation that her art had worth. There were nights when exhaustion nearly swallowed her whole. After waiting tables for long shifts, she would hurry to rehearsals. With aching feet, her uniform stuffed hastily into her bag, she would rehearse until her voice was raw, her body begging for rest. Yet even in those moments, something inside her refused to quit, because each time she stood beneath the stage lights, even in the smallest of theaters, she remembered why she had chosen this path, not for fame, not for recognition, but for the truth that lived inside the story she told. One evening, after a performance that left her both exhilarated and drained, she lingered behind as the other actors packed up. The old director of the theater, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands stained with ink from years of scribbling notes, approached her. "You've got it," he said simply, his voice low but firm. She blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Got what?" "The fire," he replied, studying her as though she were a rare gem. "But you're holding back, trying to fit into what you think they want. Stop shrinking yourself. The world doesn't need another imitation, it needs you." His words lodged deep within her, settling into the cracks left by rejection. He became more than a director to her. He became a mentor. He taught her to stop apologizing for her presence, to stop trimming herself down in hopes of fitting into someone else's vision. He urged her to embrace her identity fully, to pour into her performances the richness of her heritage, the strength of her history, the beauty of her difference. And when she did, something shifted. Her voice carried new power, her movements new conviction. She was no longer playing roles to please others. She was embodying them as only she could. The character she brought to life felt real, undeniable. Audiences began to lean in closer. Whispers started to travel beyond the walls of those small theaters. It began subtly. A local newspaper ran a short column about an up-and-coming actress electrifying small stages across the city. Then came the blog reviews, written by theater enthusiasts who stumbled into her performances and left astonished. Soon her name started appearing in conversations whispered in casting halls, spoken in tones of curiosity and interest. "Have you heard of her?" She's doing something different. There's a rawness you can't look away. At first, Amara didn't believe it. She still lived in the same modest apartment, still worked the same shifts, still rode the same buses across the city, but the murmurs grew. Sometimes she would catch someone looking at her a beat too long, as if trying to place her face. Sometimes, an audition panel would hesitate, whispering among themselves before she left the room. It was subtle, fragile, like the first signs of dawn after a long night. Yet it was there. Her mentor noticed too. They're starting to see you, he told her one evening after rehearsal. Not because you changed, but because you finally stopped hiding. Amara smiled at that, though part of her remained cautious. She knew how quickly the industry could turn cold again. But deep inside, a spark of hope burned brighter than ever. She began to imagine something more than community stages, more than fleeting mentions in newspapers. She began to dream not timidly this time, but boldly. Her story was not yet known to the world. But her name was beginning to circulate, carried like a secret on the edges of conversations. And though she didn't know it yet, those whispers were the first winds of a storm that would change everything. Los Angeles had a way of swallowing dreams whole, but it also had a way of revealing them when the time was right. For Amara, the city no longer looked quite the same. The cracked sidewalks and neon lights she had once walked past with weary eyes now seemed to whisper a possibility, though she could never point to why. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the faint stirring of a tide before it swells. One evening, as she hurried down Wilshire Boulevard, she caught sight of a billboard glowing high above the street. For a split second, she thought she imagined it, her own name flickering across the screen in bold, golden letters. The advertisement changed in a heartbeat, replaced by another face, another title, another movie. But her heart skipped as though it had stopped time. Was it real? Or was it her exhaustion painting illusions across the city lights? She said nothing, not even to her mentor, yet the image clung to her, haunting her steps as though the city itself were dropping clues she wasn't yet ready to see. Days later, whispers became louder. In a coffee shop near Sunset, to strangers leaning across their table, newspapers spread wide. She overheard fragments: new starlet, raw, unforgettable performance, critics stunned. Their voices were filled with awe, but they never mentioned the name aloud. She sat silently in the corner, sipping her drink, pretending to read, while her pulse hammered with suspicion. And then there were the crowds. She passed by a theater one Saturday evening, its entrance lined with velvet ropes and glowing bulbs. People clustered in waves outside, their chatter buzzing with excitement. Flashing cameras painted the night in bursts of white, reporters jostling for space. She couldn't see the posters clearly, blocked by the sea of bodies, but she heard the question rippling across the reporters' lips as they held their microphones high. Who is she? The word sent a shiver down her spine. She moved past the crowd, unnoticed in the chaos. Yet her heart thudded with a wild, unspoken recognition. Later, scrolling half-heartedly through her phone, she stumbled across a clip circulating online. It showed a red carpet, the roar of fans, and a woman stepping into view beneath the spotlights. The video blurred as the camera jolted, but in one frame, just one, she caught her own reflection staring back at her. The gown shimmered. The hair was styled differently, the smile braver than she ever remembered wearing. But it was her. It had to be. Her breath caught. She replayed it again and again, each time convincing herself she must be mistaken. Yet deep inside, she knew her moment was no longer a distant dream. It was unfolding right before her, piece by piece, in glimpses and shadows. Her mentor was the first to speak of it aloud. He handed her a newspaper one morning, its front page dominated by a headline that made her throat tighten. Breakout star captivates Hollywood, a name to remember. The photograph wasn't entirely clear, her face half-turned, caught mid-laughter, but even obscured. The recognition was undeniable. They're talking about you, he said quietly, watching her with pride glimmering in his tired eyes. Amara touched the page with trembling fingers, tracing the blurred outline of her own smile. She wanted to deny it, to say it was too soon, too surreal, yet the evidence was everywhere, building around her like a rising tide. The murmurs in casting halls, the knowing looks from strangers, the sudden warmth in the way people said her name. She remembered the long nights in tiny theaters, the director's cold dismissal, the aching weight of rejections. Now, the world that had once ignored her seemed to be asking in unison, who is she? The question spread like wildfire. Critics dissected her performances, noting the raw authenticity and unpolished brilliance that set her apart. Fans whispered her name online, crafting theories and piecing together fragments of her journey. Casting agents leaned forward, in their seats, intrigued by the storm gathering around her, but Amara herself remained cautious. She continued rehearsing with the same intensity, showing up to work with humility. As though the world outside hadn't begun to shift, she didn't chase the billboards or the headlines. She clung instead to the fire that had carried her through dimly lit stages and empty pockets of obscurity, yet the city refused to let her humility hide her light. Everywhere she went, she caught glimpses of herself refracted through the lens of a world awakening to her presence. A passing bus carried an advertisement where her name glowed faintly beneath a film title. A late-night talk show replayed a clip of her laughing at a premiere, the host marveling at her poise. Even strangers at her cafe job began to tilt their heads, whispering as though they almost recognized her. Her moment was no longer coming. It was here. But the strange beauty of it was this: the story never declared itself outright. It unfolded in fragments, included scattered like breadcrumbs for those willing to piece them together. A billboard here, a headline there, a crowd chanting her name in the night while she walked home alone. Anonymous beneath her hood, the city had once told her she didn't have the right look. Now, it was looking for her everywhere. And though she couldn't see the full picture yet, the truth was undeniable. Amara Jameson was no longer just another face in the audition line. She was becoming something more, something that could not be ignored. Her rise was not a flash of light, but a gathering storm, and the world was only just beginning to notice. The night of the Oscars arrived in Los Angeles like a coronation. The city glittered with limousines, flashing bulbs, and voices echoing across red carpets. But in the quiet hills above the noise, a single man sat alone in his sprawling home, the glow of the television painting his living room in shades of gold and white. The director poured himself another glass of wine, the stem of the crystal trembling faintly in his hand. His hair had thinned in the years since that afternoon in the casting studio, though his presence still carried an aura of authority and aura he wore like armor. Even when no one was watching, he didn't care much for the Oscars anymore. He had been there, had accepted awards, had lost some, had long grown cynical about what the golden statue meant. Tonight, the ceremony was just background noise to fill the silence of an empty house. He flipped channels idly, landing on the broadcast only because the screen glittered brighter than the others. And then, suddenly, he froze. On the screen, beneath the blinding chandeliers of the Dolby Theater, a woman glided onto the stage. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause as the camera followed her. She was radiant, dressed in an elegant gown that shimmered with each step. Her smile was poised, but her eyes carried the same fire he had once seen flicker years ago. In the corner of a casting room, his glass stopped midway to his lips. The wine trembled, spilling slightly onto his hand, but he didn't notice. His chest tightened as though the air itself had conspired against him. It was her, Amara Jameson. The name rolled across the bottom of the screen in bold white letters as the announcer's voice boomed. And now, accepting the Academy Award for Best Actress, his hand slackened. The glass slipped from his fingers and landed on the carpet with a muffled thud, the wine bleeding into the fabric like spilled blood. He barely registered it. His eyes were locked on the screen, his breath shallow, his mind roaring with disbelief. The young woman he had dismissed so casually, the one he had cut off mid-line, claiming she didn't have the right look, was now standing on the most coveted stage in the world, golden statue in hand. He leaned forward in his chair, his face pale, his jaw slack. He could almost hear his own words echoing back from the past, cruel and hollow. Not the right look, not the right look. But the universe wasn't done twisting the knife, because as the montage played on the screen the clips of the award-winning film that had brought her here, the interviews, the behind-the-scenes glimpses, his stomach dropped further. He knew that script. He knew the story, the characters, the setting. The film had once crossed his own desk. He remembered the day clearly now, though he had buried it under years of other rejections. A young producer had brought it to him, eyes bright with conviction. The script had been raw, emotional, a story that pulsed with urgency. But he hadn't even finished reading it. He had tossed it aside, shaking his head. It won't sell, he had said dismissively, his voice as flat as when he had dismissed her in the audition room. Audiences aren't ready for that kind of story. He had sent the producer away, confident in his judgment, and now here it was, the film he had brushed off as worthless, the actress he had cast aside as unsuitable together. They had created something the world could not ignore, something history itself would remember. The irony was suffocating. Not only had he missed her talent, he had missed the very project that would become a cultural phenomenon, a film now destined for textbooks, think pieces, and the eternal roll call of Oscar-winning cinema. He pressed his hands to his face, as though shielding himself from the glare of the television, but the sound of her voice pulled his fingers apart. Amara was speaking now, her voice clear and unwavering, reverberating through the theater and into his home. She didn't mention his name, but she didn't need to. Every word was an arrow, and each found its mark. To every director who told me no, she said, her voice catching only slightly before growing stronger, thank you. You forced me to dig deeper, to work harder, to believe in myself when no one else would. And to every young girl who has ever been told she doesn't fit the part, this is for you. Don't let them decide your worth. You already have it. The audience rose to its feet, applause thunderous, the sound rattling through the screen and filling the director's silent home. He sat motionless, his body heavy, his heart pounding against his ribs. In the space of minutes, the careful certainty of his career, the arrogance that had guided every decision, crumbled into dust. He saw now the truth he had refused to see then. His blindness had cost him everything. He had lost her. He had lost the story. He had lost the chance to be part of history. And as Amara stood center stage, bathed in golden light, her statue gleaming in her hand, the director sat in his dim living room, drowned in the shadows of his own failure. The world had already moved on without him. The theater lights bathed Amara Jameson in a golden glow as she stood at the center of the stage, the Oscar clutched tightly in her hand. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. The weight of the statue pressed against her palm, cool and solid. But it wasn't the gold that overwhelmed her, it was the sight of thousands rising to their feet, their applause crashing like waves against her chest. She had dreamed of this moment once, quietly, secretly, in the solitude of her tiny apartment, where hope felt too fragile to speak aloud. But no dream had ever captured the sheer electricity that now coursed through her veins. Her eyes shimmered as she leaned toward the microphone. The theater grew still. Save for the fading echo of applause, she could feel her pulse racing. Yet, her voice, when it came, was steady, stronger than she had ever known it could be. Thank you, she began, the word trembling with sincerity. Thank you to the Academy, to the cast and crew who believed in this story, and to everyone who gave me the chance to stand here tonight. The crowd listened, hushed, as though the very air was bending toward her. She drew in a slow breath, her mind flickering back through the years. She saw her mother's tired smile after long shifts, still urging her to chase her dream. She heard her grandmother's voice in church, telling her that her gift was meant to be shared. She remembered the neighbors who helped her pay for acting classes when she couldn't afford them, the teachers who slipped her books and scripts, the community theaters that gave her a stage when no one else would. I want to thank my family, she continued, her voice thickening with emotion. My mother, who carried me through storms with nothing but love. My grandmother, who taught me strength and faith. My community, who lifted me when the world said I couldn't rise. This statue belongs to all of you. The audience erupted into applause again, brief but thunderous, before falling into reverent silence once more. Her fingers tightened around the Oscar as she steadied herself for the words she knew she needed to say, words that had burned in her chest since the day she walked out of that audition room, dismissed before she could even finish a line. And to every person who told me no, her voice grew sharper, resonant, carrying across the hall like a bell. Thank you. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. She paused just long enough for the words to sink in, then continued, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. Every rejection made me stronger. Every closed door pushed me to find another way in. Every voice that doubted me forced me to believe in myself louder than ever before. Her lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes glistened. Without those no's, I would not be standing here tonight. So this victory, this moment, is not in spite of them, it is because of them. There was a murmur of approval, people nodding, some clapping gently, but she wasn't finished. Her tone softened, taking on a gravity that hushed the hall again. And to the directors who couldn't see me, she let the words hang in the air, heavy, deliberate. To those who looked past me, who said I wasn't the right fit, Who thought I didn't have the look? Know this, I see you, and I forgive you, because you, too, shaped me. You made me work harder, dig deeper, and show the world that I belonged here all along. The theater erupted, applause crashing louder than before, building into a roar that seemed to shake the very rafters. She stood taller, shoulders squared, her gown catching the stage lights like liquid gold. To every young girl watching tonight who feels unseen or unheard, don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone else to tell you who you are. Your worth is not in their eyes, it's in your voice, your heart, your truth. Carry it, protect it, and never, ever let it go. The ovation this time was instant, unstoppable. The audience surged to their feet, a wave of movement and sound that engulfed the theater. Stars with decades of acclaim rose alongside newcomers, clapping, cheering, some with tears in their eyes. Cameras panned across faces shining with admiration, capturing the moment the world had been waiting for without even knowing it. And somewhere far away, in the dim quiet of his living room, the director sat frozen before his television. His glass of wine lay forgotten on the carpet, its stain spreading like an accusation. He could only watch as the woman he had once dismissed so casually, so cruelly, was now celebrated by the very industry he thought he controlled. Her words pierced him, though she had not spoken his name. Each syllable, each pause, was a reminder of his blindness, his arrogance, his failure to see what the world now saw so clearly. He leaned forward, his face caught in the flickering light of the screen, powerless as the crowd's ovation thundered. In his ears, Amara stood on that stage, a queen crowned not by gold, but by truth. And he, the man who once claimed she didn't have the right look, was forced to confront the bitter reality. She had always been more than enough. As the orchestra swelled and she raised the Oscar high, the applause reached a crescendo. In that sound, there was triumph, vindication, and history itself being written. And in the shadows of his silent room, the director bowed his head, knowing he would never escape the echo of her voice, or the sight of the world rising to honor the woman he failed to see. The ovation lingered long after the orchestra swelled, as if the sound itself refused to fade. Amara Jameson's silhouette against the golden light of the stage became etched into memory, not just those in the Grand Theater that night, but of millions watching across the world. Her story had traveled farther than any script could have written, carried on the breath of determination, resilience, and a truth too powerful to be silenced. But beyond the glitter of the Academy Awards, beyond the roaring applause and flashing cameras, her triumph carried a weight far greater than the gold statue in her hand. It was proof, a living testament that talent, when nourished by perseverance, could not be buried by prejudice, no matter how deep the soil. Somewhere in Los Angeles, in a dim apartment, where silence now pressed heavier than the wine-stained carpet, a man sat staring at the television screen. His face, once so certain, so dismissive, bore lines of disbelief and quiet ruin. He had thought himself a gatekeeper, a judge of worth and possibility, yet tonight, the gates he once guarded so tightly had been torn wide open, and the world had poured in to witness what he could not. For him, it was a bitter irony, a double loss. Not only had he let her slip through his fingers, blind to the fire that burned within her, but he had also cast aside the very project that would go on to make history. The words wouldn't sell now echoed back at him like a curse, hollow and mocking, and perhaps in some small corner of his conscience, he knew this was not fate's cruelty. This was the cost of his own blindness. But the story was not his to own. It belonged to her, the girl who once trembled as she stepped into a studio, clutching her script with hope trembling in her hands. It belonged to the young woman who endured the sting of dismissal yet carried herself with dignity, who walked out of rejection not broken, but burning brighter. It belonged to every late-night rehearsal in dusty community theaters, every whispered prayer, every headline that hinted at her rising name. It belonged to the countless times she stood on the edge of giving up, only to find within herself one more breath, one more step, one more leap of faith. And now, it belonged to the world, as her voice echoed through the grandest stage of all. Talent, true talent, could not be dimmed. No curtain could hide it forever. No prejudice, no shallow excuse. No dismissive glance had the power to bury what was destined to bloom. For talent, when married to perseverance, has a way of breaking through the hardest ground, growing wild and unstoppable until it commands the very light that once refused to shine upon it. Her journey carried another truth, to one less comfortable, but no less vital. Rejection, painful though it may be, can be the very fire that forges greatness. For every no she endured had sharpened her resolve. Each slammed door had built her strength. Each insult had carved out the space for her dignity to grow. What was meant to break her had instead become her steel. And when the world finally turned its gaze her way, she stood not as someone desperate for validation, but as someone who had already proven her worth long before the applause arrived. And then there was the lesson that lingered like a shadow behind her triumph. Those who failed to see potential, Elle and others often lived to witness what they could never imagine. For the director, the night was a mirror, cruel and unflinching. He had been given a chance to see, to believe, to nurture, and he had turned away. Now he watched as the very choice he dismissed reshaped the industry, rewrote the narrative, and crowned the woman he once overlooked as its queen. That is the quiet justice of life. The seeds of greatness do not die simply because someone refuses to water them. They grow anyway, pushing through concrete, reaching for light, demanding to be seen. And when they finally bloom, they bloom with a radiance so undeniable that even those who doubted cannot look away. Amara Jameson stood that night as more than an actress. She was a symbol, a beacon, a reminder carved in gold and applause that no rejection can define you, no prejudice can contain you, and no voice of doubt can silence the truth of who you are. And for every dreamer watching, every soul carrying a quiet hope while the world says no, her story whispered across the screen, in the living rooms, in the hearts. Keep going, keep fighting. The world may not see you today, but it will die, for true greatness is not handed down by those who guard the gates. It is born in the struggle, forged in the fire of rejection, and revealed in the moment when the world finally realizes what it had overlooked all along. And so, the curtain fell on Oscar night, but the story did not end. It began anew in the hearts of those who saw themselves in her, in the dreams reignited by her triumph, and in the silent reckoning of those who once believed they had the power to say who belonged and who did not, because the truth was clear, undeniable, eternal. Talent and perseverance cannot be buried. They rise. Always, they rise.